there is a timeline for your mission that is not just about you. I think so often people can go, oh God, why am I so blocked? I've got this big vision and I can't make it happen. The world isn't ready. The timing isn't ready. You're not ready. It's never just about you. Trust that the mission will manifest at the right time and it will manifest at the right speed for you. I've seen many people take intuitive messages and try and force them into their life. And I always say, if that is your truth, it will happen at a time where you can hold it and manifest it. But if you're trying to force it and you're not paying attention to how many areas of your life are going wrong, well, never mind what spirit told you, how's it going?
Yeah.
Like, you are the human, you are living spirit.
I know you do these energy updates that people really value. And I'm curious, is there any kind of forecast that you can share with us about this year to support us in having a sense of what to expect? Welcome back to the Healing and Human Potential podcast, where today we're diving into the unseen forces that shape our lives through energy, intuition, and the shifts in human consciousness that are unfolding on the planet right now. What if the way that we navigate fear, uncertainty, and even technology could be completely transformed by understanding energy on a deeper level? What if our emotions, our relationship, and our purpose were part of a bigger, interconnected evolution? Our guest, Lee Harris, has spent over 2 decades offering intuitive guidance, and today he's going to share about the future of humanity and why heart energy is such a key to thriving in these times. He'll also talk about how to stay grounded amidst all of the global changes that are happening. So if you're curious about where we're heading as a collective and how to personally align with the most expansive version of yourself, this episode is for you. I'm so happy that you're here.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I can already feel I'm so embodied in my heart just in your presence.
Aww.
And I know you do these energy updates that people really value. And I'm curious about this year that we're in, 2025. Is there any kind of forecast that you can share with us about this year to support us in having a sense of what to expect?
Yeah, I actually did an annual energy update for the year, which is written, and you can find that for free on YouTube or at my website. But it's an interesting thing. I've been doing this work for a long time, and one of the things that would always come through the messages from my guides was that when we got to 2017 and 2024, that period of time, that 7 years, was going to be a game changer for the planet. And then after that, we start to go into what they call the birth of the new. So 2025, we've reached it. And what has come to me is we are still going to see the same kind of, shall we say, fight that we see going on right now between controlling and limiting attitudes or attempts to keep us, shall I say, keep us down within the system versus empowered and free to create something new. We're still going to see that battle, but we're also in this year going to see more evidence than ever before of the new way. And that's really important, because I think it's one thing to threaten to people that they're going to lose something, and then everyone goes, oh my God, I'm going to lose this thing. And there is the fear of unknown of what will replace it. But it's a completely different story when you show someone, oh, here's an alternative way, you can try it. The person tries it and they go, oh, that works. And I'm willing to let go of that old thing. So I've noticed in the last five years or so, there's been a lot of loss and a lot of taking away and a lot of removal. And it's left people quite understandably disoriented, particularly if you aren't someone who's on a spiritual path or had any precursor knowledge that this is the period that we're in. Because this has been forecast for a long, long time, that this period of history is going to be tumultuous and massive changes. But the one thing that I'm looking forward to this year is seeing more evidence of the new ways and the birth of a higher consciousness way of doing things on the planet for people. So it will still be very up and down. And I think this is why so much of the messaging that I've been asked to give the last few years is the importance of working with ourselves and our systems, because there can be all kinds of crazy going on out in the outside world. How we respond to it is everything.
Exactly. I the more I do this podcast, the more I just come back, whether it's a doctor, it's an intuitive, everybody just comes back to having tools to navigate our inner world because we can't control what happens outside. And I really look at things from a learning orientation. So rather than being a victim, it's like, how can I learn from this? How do I use this for my healing and my growth? And I think that can be really helpful when people are transitioning or going through change, not to get sucked into it thinking that it's bad, but it's like, okay, if this were here to teach me something, what would that be? Right? Then I don't feel like a victim to it.
It's funny you bring up victim because that was one of the messages for this year. It also came up in, I think, the energy update I did for either December or January, the end of victimhood. And I think that when someone hears a sentence like that, depending on how you feel about the idea of victimhood, you can have all kinds of reactions. Let's say you've just gone through a really big trauma, or you're carrying an old trauma that has just surfaced in your life and you're working on it, or you've just had something awful happen to you. Being told not to be a victim is going to be really annoying, and you're going to defend your right to feel like a victim, because feeling like or being a victim of a circumstance or a situation is something that happens to all of us. And we'll all have moments of that. But what was coming through loud and clear in this message that I was asked to deliver is that no longer can we hide in the identity of being a victim, and no longer should a moment or a day or a week of experiencing victimhood become your new energy template for the future. And how when we sit in victimhood, we will defend against the new coming in, when we have been victimized in some way, or we're experiencing ourselves through that lens. One of the things that repairs us or heals us is some light coming through the window, or a friend calling you, or you suddenly find a book that helps you start to unpick your way out. So there are always things around us that are calling us back into our life force. But when we're in victimhood, we usually shut down and defend and protect what life force we have left, because we've lost trust of whether or not we can navigate the rest of the world. So it's kind of a big theme right now. It's interesting you brought that up.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that it's the timing that's also important, because we don't want to invalidate somebody's experience. If they had a microaggression, something did happen to them, I think there's a place to feel the victim and not to live there. But one of the things that I'll do is like to consciously complain or to consciously be the victim, just to allow that part of me full expression without unconsciously living from it. And to meet somebody, not invalidating their experience, but then, yes, then how can I move on from it so I don't just unconsciously get something out of it by living in that identity of victim. When we get stuck in that, I think that what you're saying is so accurate about like, I can't actually then evolve beyond it. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I think the timing of when we address these things is really great.
Just going back to the victim thing for a second, I think one of the things that I have noticed, and I'm sure many have over recent years, is there can be a real us and them scenario that people like to repeat around government politics and those systems. So one of the things my guides have said many times over recent years is that we're coming into a period where people will remember the power they have and will move out of this, in a way, baby state that I think many of us find ourselves in or can find ourselves in when we think about, oh, okay, well, they're setting the rules, they're setting the parameters, and we all just have to follow it. And I think if you've noticed how many people in the last 4 or 5 years especially have really started to question what we're told and what we're not told and what we're shown and what we're not shown, I think we're only at the beginning of that breakthrough. And now in these next years to come, as more, I think, gets revealed, which is already happening, but it's going to ramp up in this 5-year period we're in, more is going to come out about our history on Earth and things that have been perhaps put off to the side or hidden. And as those things come out, it is going to create quite a reckoning between people and those in power. So we're going to go through this very tumultuous but important shift around people and power, which is why also at the moment you do see a lot of attempts to rigidly control people in a stronger way than perhaps some of us in our lifetime or in our areas of the world have seen, because there is this almost race to control and limit before consciousness gets to a point where people become freer in a way than we have been allowed to be so far. So all of that's going on at the energetic level. It doesn't mean everybody's feeling that way or noticing it. There will be groups, like really to your question, those of us who are here to be part of the mission of that change and transformation, we are going to feel more activated, more here on purpose than ever before. And one of the messages that has come through my guides a lot is you will now find each other. You will be able to build things faster. You will see incredible results happen in a less limited way. Now we've hit 2025, and there will be quite a wave of transformational leadership, and not just leadership, but systems and structures that many can find themselves within. So that's the kind of energetic way of looking at it. But of course, it's going to hit us all differently. There'll be those people who are really ready to go and they've been doing this work for a while and they'll see an elevation of things. There'll be others who perhaps have not taken this kind of path, who's suddenly waking up to things being different to how they were and they're beginning their journey. And then there are also going to be a lot of people in grief, loss, and shock about what's going on and what they're seeing and what they're experiencing, because that group will have been perhaps a little more held together by how the world used to look, and perhaps they never questioned it or they didn't care to look outside it. Whereas I know many of us kind of came here wired going, well, hang on a second, this doesn't quite make sense. I need to investigate this. A lot of that group will be going through it could take a few years for them to go through the grief or the dark night of the soul. And so many of us will be called to be there for them in whatever way, whether it's just listening, whether it's being someone who can give advice. So again, you see this interplay of people who are here to be what I would call transformational leaders, whether that's someone who is, educating people about spiritual psychology, or whether that's someone in the community who takes it upon themselves to create some kind of weekly gathering for your local neighborhood. And we must never dismiss the power of that. I think often we have this almost hero worship of big things that we see happen in the world, or what we call big success. And it's no more important or valid, or on an energetic level, more valuable than the small thing that happens. I always go back to, the grandmothers and the grandfathers who, to so many of us, are so influential. And they just quietly give and love on those children and completely shape who those children become. They're not doing it for credit. They're not doing it for thanks. These are private moments that happen, but they are doing what they are here to do. And so I think a lot of people now are getting more activated. The caution I would give people is to remember that if you are a mission-driven person, there is a timeline for your mission that is not just about you. I think so often people can go, oh God, why am I so blocked? I've got this big vision and I can't make it happen. The world isn't ready. The timing isn't ready. You're not ready. It's never just about you. And I grew up, when I was coming through spirituality and self-growth, I started around 16, 17. Back then, 30 years ago, we were often told, what's our resistance? What's our problem? And I think as I really deepened my understanding of things, I realized how limited that way of thinking can be. It can be helpful sometimes for some areas of your life, but there's always this massive picture going on all around us that no matter how knowledgeable, educated, or intuitive you are, you're never going to know the whole picture. So I think there's something about, especially for people who are mission-driven, trust that the mission will manifest, and it will manifest at the right time, and it will manifest at the right speed for you. Because sometimes I meet people who have that burning in them, and they want it to happen today, or they want it to happen now, or perhaps they want it to happen because they think it will solve the other problem in their life. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, those problems don't go, if we have something we need to resolve, it's going to find us one way or another.
You're going to project it on one thing or another. Yeah. If the ego doesn't shift the root of that perspective, it will project onto team or family or work. And I love that the way that you think is so global and I love that because I think so micro, and it's the same. It's a mirror, micro and macro. And so even just navigating I was hearing what you were talking about around integrity. Sometimes things need to come to light to really come into alignment. And so looking at different things that I'm going through personally right now, learning about being in my power, which is about having my heart open and being able to speak my truth with connection. I was sharing with you before the podcast started, when I was a kid, I would be sent to my room, I would lose connection. And I started playing that out in my team. When something didn't work for me, I would share something, but I wasn't maintaining the connection. I thought, oh, there's a different way to do this. It didn't feel right. And so learning about how to have the tough conversations with love, with an open heart feels like, and just again, micro, like how does this play out in a grounded way? And I'll share vulnerably about my own experience. Somebody on my team did something that was out of integrity. And rather than just pushing them off or staying in my mind because I didn't want to have the hard conversation, not assuming, but inviting a deeper conversation with love and sharing what worked and what didn't without blame. Also looking from a higher perspective. There's some wound that they were playing out. There was some wound that I was playing out. We were teachers for each other. So I don't need to get lost in the person and judging them. What's the pattern that they're here to teach me? And how do I grow in my leadership as a result of that? And I think that's also part of the growing beyond the victim, of not saying like, you did something wrong to me. It's like, oh, we are in each other's lives to help each other heal and evolve if we choose to. And so then it's like, oh, thank you for that. And I still will have boundaries. I'll still share what works and what doesn't work, but with an open heart. And I think, at least for me, that's worked really well. It's also just having the tools to navigate. And sometimes that the things that have been pushed down need to come up so that we can see. I think also sometimes suffering, the challenges that we go through in life, the change, there's intelligence in that suffering. And people have needed that suffering to motivate us to do the inner work because not all of us have been proactive. And so having the tools, I just keep coming back to like how valuable that is. And I also love what you're speaking to. It doesn't matter if it's one person or 1 million people. It's the energy that matters. And when we're living in alignment with what's true for us and keeping our hearts open, which is really to me being in our power, that's one of the greatest, we are a beneficial presence in the world. We're living in alignment with our heart. And I think that's one of the greatest things we can do. Like my grandfather died when I was 3 and he was my first memory. I've never felt more seen and loved by someone. I knew exactly everything about being with him when I was 3 and how adored I was. And it kept a spiritual attunement open because I felt so safe in his presence. And so I love that you're sharing like on the goal line of life, it doesn't really matter. On the soul line of just like keeping our hearts open and the frequency and the energy, that's what matters. And so it's such a reassuring thing. I think a lot of people are going to hear the impact that we make.
Yeah. Oh, I love everything you said. It's interesting too, because the other thing that hits me about, that kind of sometimes that illusion of bigger is better.
Yeah.
I think actually if you are someone who, let's say, does work in the world that reaches a certain scale, the great challenge is how do you maintain yourself and the integrity of your work? Because scale can consume.
Yeah.
And it can be its own level of chaos. And so in a way, I'm always encouraging people not to try and grow fast because I always say, no, you just keep doing what you're doing and checking your alignment. And if it's meant to grow, it will grow. And to your point about grandparents, it's funny, my grandmother was so quiet, like she barely spoke, really didn't use many words. And she died when I was about 23, 24. And it was only after she died that I really realized how important she was to me. I mean, I loved her when she was there, and luckily I got to spend a lot of time with her as she was dying. And that was one of the most, spiritual memories of my life, the most impactful. But what I've kind of learned through that is, her love did not get shown through words, but it was action. And I felt really safe in her presence. And then I, through my own romantic relationship path, had to learn, I'm re-choosing. I'm choosing people who maybe can't communicate about feelings, which is something I had to, in a way, I came in wired with a lot of feeling, but not necessarily, I was in a family where there was a lot of love, But like many of that generation, feelings weren't talked about or articulated. So I kind of drowned a bit in my teenage years. And then when I started to heal and repair, I noticed that now I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, I was choosing the same family imprint of what I thought love was, until I got to a point of going, okay, now who are you? Like, who is the you that you're becoming and uncovering and turning into as you're evolving and growing? And then what is the person to match that for you? And that's very different to what has been modeled to you, how you used to perceive yourself. It's fascinating, isn't it? How we go through life. And I think that's the most amazing thing about it. The destination will always change. If you get to your destination, or if you manifest the thing that you're looking for, that thing is going to go, great, here's a few surprises that you weren't expecting about this. You intuitively knew you were supposed to create this, but the hidden lessons in this is going to be X, Y, and Z. And one of them is a gift, one of them is a healing from your past, and one of them is going to be really challenging for you. And how are you doing with that? Because I think we're always just opening more potential petals in ourselves. We're constantly becoming this, hopefully, more beautiful lotus flower the older we get, because our consciousness expands and our body of experience expands. So I really love getting older in that way, because I'm like, oh, certain things are just easier now than they used to be when they were more charged for me, or I would say I had less of an ability to hold myself in my own wounds.
Yeah.
Than I can now. And that's what I love about what you were sharing. It's like, yeah, the wound doesn't have to be this deep suffering, and we don't have to be ashamed of it. That's the other difference. I think in my 20s and stuff, I would have had more shame around a difficult conversation with someone, or how I behaved, or, oh my God, why did I do that thing they're really upset at me for? I'd have got lost in that for days or weeks.
Yeah.
And these days I'm like, okay, I've apologized, or they've apologized. I can see what was going on. It's all good. No one was trying to harm someone, and we can move on. Life is bigger than this moment of emotion between two people.
Yeah, it's the maturity, which is what you were talking about on the macro. Like, and in some ways, as a society, we're still quite young and undeveloped. Not bad, but young. And so I think as we, micro, macro, as we are getting older, I think I can also attest to just learning to keep the heart open, even if it's to the closed heart, and to hold things in perspective and to have less of that personal shame. But that's also what's happening on the macro as an invitation to really grow beyond. It's like the end of the world. And it's like, okay, this is in service. And you even said choosing partners that mirror what my imprint of love was. And so you not being a victim to saying, I'm choosing this. And what's another choice? And how can I learn from this? So again, just kind of highlighting some of the subtext of what our conversation has been, I think is helpful. Imagine having a fulfilling career doing what you love, working from anywhere in the world, setting your own hours while making good money and a big impact. If that lights you up, then I'm super excited to share with you today's sponsor, the Institute for Coaching Mastery. This is my robust, accredited year-long certification program for new or seasoned coaches, therapists, leaders, and those just looking to up-level their life in a profound way. We have an amazing community of students from all around the world who have really started their journey to expand with us both personally and professionally. And this experience is designed to give you the 3 things that you need to thrive. So first, you have all of the tools and support you need to move past what's been holding you back so that you can completely change the trajectory of your life. And then you learn how to masterfully and confidently facilitate transformation with your clients or your team, regardless of your niche. If you want to do health, business, relationship, or you just have no idea yet, we hold your hand through that. And then lastly, you'll receive my 6-figure and beyond signature roadmap that's customizable to meet you wherever you are. So whether you want to do high ticket sales, online marketing, or you just want to hit 6 figures without ever needing to go on social media, we've got you covered. And this truly is the most rewarding work in the world. We have new students now who have a wait list of dream clients in under a year. We also have seasoned students who are doing $80,000 months. And this is really about creating lasting transformation from the inside out so that you can share your gifts and serve the world in all the ways that you're called to. And I've seen firsthand the power of what happens when you have the community to collaborate with, but you also have the right tools and resources to really thrive. And so whether you want to do your own personal development, you're wanting to become a coach, or you're just looking for a cutting edge approach to really grow your business, the Institute for Coaching Mastery is for you. You are held every single step of the way. And so if you want to get behind the scenes access to the Institute with 3 proven transformational tools for free to help you create the business and life you love, all you have to do is go to alyssanobriga.com/tools, or you can find us at alyssanobriga.com/apply now to see all the details and apply today. I know you talked about trust, and I think self-trust is such a big challenge for people. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your journey has been, or what you recommend for people to really develop their embodied knowing or trust in their deeper knowing?
It's interesting, isn't it? One of the pieces of advice I give people about trusting their intuition or trusting their guidance, because that's something I've lived with and worked with now for a long, long time, is to test it. So do not blindly follow your intuitive messages, study them, and be a scientist around your gift. Because I have met some people who aren't standing back and analyzing what's happening. They're just going, oh my God, I can't believe it. I followed my guidance again and it went wrong. And I'm like, well, how many times has it gone wrong? Well, this year, 6 times. And I'm like, okay, well, we need to check who that voice is and, how you're interpreting that voice and what's your mind then doing with that message. Because just to stay on intuition and guidance, which is an area I guess I have a real trust of, what I actually trust is the truth of multiple timelines. So to me, for any of us on any given day or in any situation in our life, there are multiple possible timelines. So for example, for you and I today, there could have been a timeline of, oh, they like each other, they get on, they do the interview, it's fine, and away they go. Another timeline could be, oh, they really like each other. Oh, they're going to meet up for dinner afterwards, or they're going to collaborate in something. Okay, cool. Or another timeline could have been, that didn't go very well. She didn't really like him. He felt uncomfortable. There are all these possibilities depending on how we show up. And we are able to tweak, influence, and change things all the time, which is why I think one of the misconceptions about intuition is that intuition is giving you a hard fact that you are just the puppet to walk towards the truth of that intuition. And I don't believe that at all. I believe intuition is like GPS or Waze. So, you go the wrong way, or intuition says, come over here. And you're like, oh God, I took the wrong road. Well, it will reroute you. Mm-hmm. If that was your truth, if that was your timeline, if you don't make it this month, you'll make it next month. I've seen many people take intuitive or guided messages and try and force them into their life. And I always say, if that is your truth, it will happen at a time where you can hold it and manifest it. But if you're trying to force it and you're not paying attention to how many areas of your life are going wrong, while you are protesting to all your friends who are worried about you, no, the vision said I'm supposed to move to Brazil and take all my life savings and put them into this retreat center from 1972 that needs renovating, and I'm not quite sure I've got the money, but Spirit told me. And I'm like, well, never mind what Spirit told you. How's it going?
Yeah.
You are the human, you are living spirit. So what I noticed working in this field very early on, and it was a great education for me because I would never have seen this if I hadn't been also in a teacher role as well as a student of all of this, how many of us give our power away to intuition or messages or guidance. And I think that's also why so many people are afraid of it, or they judge it. Some people are afraid of getting a message because well, what will I do? And I think we haven't had a maturity around you can live with and alongside intuitive messages. They are not in charge and they are not always right, and we won't always interpret them correctly. So that's why I say study your relationship to your intuition. If it's highly successful, fantastic. Keep going, do something else, don't worry about it. If you're noticing sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, ask yourself questions. Am I misinterpreting or overinterpreting what I'm getting? So it really is a study. It's an aspect of life, I think, that we can all include, but I don't think it should ever be seen as in charge.
I love
So-
that. And I know a big question is, how do you know the difference between fear and intuition? What do you tell people specifically about that?
I can go somewhere else if that's okay with that
Yeah.
question. I have a thing around, because you asked me also about trust as a human.
Yeah.
And I've learned for myself that if I'm growing, I'm going to be uncomfortable at some point. And some aspect of me is going to have to die off
And be scared.
in order for a bigger aspect of me to perhaps embody me for the first time ever or at a new level. So I have a thing about fear. If I'm afraid, that's okay. I'll keep walking towards it. If I'm terrified, then it's either not my thing, not my time, or my body's level of fear of being able to walk into this is not going to support a positive experience for me. I'm not ready. It's not my time. My body can't vibrate in a way that it can be in that. So I shouldn't force myself. So fear for me is like part of the edge of growth or doing something bolder than you usually would. And that's great, because the other side of fear is excitement. Terror to me is, this is not my thing, or I have an intuition I shouldn't do this, or this is just something I'm not capable of embodying right now. Maybe in 2 years' time, I will have grown in those areas and it will be my time to walk into that thing. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I play with fear. But I think fear and intuition, usually it isn't the intuition that's giving you fear.
Yeah.
Intuition and messages from spirit are actually neutral. It's us that get hold of them. I can give you a personal example. I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and I was walking the hill one day. And, you know, the way it works with my guides, I'm in radio with them all the time because of my work. And I will speak to them personally, could be as many times as 2 or 3 times a week, or I might go 2 weeks without talking to them. But they're always there. I mean, we're always somehow in radio on a more non-verbal level. I was walking the hill in Boulder, Colorado, 2014, and it was one of those rare times where they speak to me without me asking something. And they literally said, you're leaving Boulder, you're going to California, you have about 6 months, prepare. And I went into fear, loss, grief. You know, I'd moved from England in 2012, and I was really trying to make my life work there. And I had a few people I loved dearly who I really cared about. I'd moved to America to do my work, but also because I felt like this would be an expansive place for me to be. So I was doing what I thought was correct. And I was really trying to, there was clearly a need in me I hadn't identified at that time, that I needed to feel like I was home. Because when you move country, if anyone's done it, it's a huge thing. And I think when I look back, I think part of me just got my head down and did it, and didn't necessarily give myself all the space to feel everything, the loss of some of that and the change. So it was interesting. In that day, that spiritual message caused me to have grief, fear, loss, confusion, and a little bit of panic, because I didn't quite know. I was like, what California? Where? I don't, the organizer in me didn't know what to do with this piece of information. So the organizer wasn't comfortable at all, because the organizer didn't know how to organize this, and it was all new information. So I went into a bit of a, but this wasn't my first rodeo with them. And I'd had those kinds of messages before. So I thought, they're probably right, because they don't normally give me those kinds of messages. There's clearly a reason it's good for me to know now. So I just started the advanced emotional shift process I needed to go through. And then lo and behold, about 7 months later, I was happily moving to California. For me, I never think of intuition as fear, but I think the mastery of self in response to intuitive or spiritual messages, or even clarity you have with a therapist, which may not seem like such a spiritual message, but it is. You know, you go through a therapy session, and at the end of it, you're like, oh my God, I'm afraid of intimacy. This is a revelation. And for a few minutes, you're like, oh my God, this explains everything. And you're happy for like 10 minutes. And then you get in the car and you go, oh, that's what happened with Jeff. And Jeff said I was a bad person and I defended, but Jeff's right. You kind of start back. So you can go on that spin, because I think the emotions and the thoughts have to reorganize themselves. You know, as we're growing and shifting and changing, we're constantly being reorganized. But we don't like that. Like my guides once said, human beings crave change and fear change in equal measure. And I thought that's really interesting because I come from a group like you do who change and consciously creating change is part of our wiring. And many of us now work to serve others in that arena because it's an arena we value, know, and understand. But yeah, it's a thing, isn't it? When you get rearranged in either your personality or your feelings. So I think intuition and fear, the fear I think often comes up because people don't know how to make the intuition happen, or they don't feel prepared for what they just heard. But what I've learned is a big intuition headline, you're going to move to California in 6 months. Well, that's just a big headline with no supporting information. It's our job. If that feels true to us, or if that proves to be true to us, we are now going to go through the days, weeks, and months it takes to fill in all the supporting information. So I think that's where we should have a light touch around intuition. It's part of how we move forward in life, but actually how we make those moves is right here. And that's why I'm a big fan of don't overvalue spirit, don't overvalue the intuition. I met many people in my first years doing this work who would be very, oh, wow, the guides. And I didn't get that because I didn't come from a channeling world. I came from a self-growth world and accidentally became a channeler. So for me, I was always surprised when people would be reverent to spirit because I'm like, no, they've never asked me to see them as more important than me. They've never belittled me or put me down. So my understanding is we're in a relationship. And that to me is the truth. So I was a little shocked when I saw a certain worship culture in the channeling world when I first got in there. And that was when I made the decision, I'm not going to play this game. I'll channel, but I'm not going to allow worship culture, and I'm going to stand for growth and transformation in this field. Therefore, I'm going to make sure I do my other work as well, which is helping people process what they're experiencing and what they're feeling. Because, when I was younger and I couldn't process what I was feeling, I was drowning and I needed any source that could help me with that. So it's funny when I go, wow, you ended up being one of those people for people. I'm like, that's amazing. I could never have forecast that, but that actually makes me feel just satisfied because I'm like, well, good. I'm contributing to something that I very directly know the need for from my own body and my own history.
Mm-hmm. It feels like in right relationship, it feels healthy.
Right.
And I think we have this authoritarian expert outside of ourselves conditioning that we're coming back into our own power around. And I do think that when we don't know the future, the mind predicts as a way to try to, like a defense mechanism. And so it can go into worst case scenario as a way to just think about how it can support itself. But it creates the very thing it's trying to avoid. And so doing some of the psychological work, like I hear you talking about, can really come into right relationship with whatever guidance we're hearing and see if those align. See if it is something that feels true, not just because I heard or I felt a sense, but I love what you're saying about empowering people to test it and to really pay attention. Because my experience with intuition is I feel a gut knowing. I don't always trust my mind because once I started hearing things, and I can hear things, but if I ask, the ego has really played with that and thrown me off. And I don't mind what way I hear information as long as I get the information that I'm interested in. But mine's more of a gut-based knowing. Mm-hmm. And it's usually just a fact. And it's usually, there's no explanation. It's just this. But I wanted to dive in a little bit more to what you were saying around trust, because it sounded like you were saying you can trust the timing of whatever unfolds. Maybe if you're anxious and you're wanting it to happen now, you haven't energetically gotten in alignment or learned certain lessons, kind of like children. Going back to that, sometimes people are like, I want to have this baby and it's not coming. There's all these other things playing out for that child's life to come into alignment, not just when the parents want to have a child. Same thing with our dreams. There's that calling. There's either the energetic that we need to hold. We maybe need to learn new skill sets, or other pieces need to come into play. So just for those people that are feeling anxious about having these big dreams, what would you say to them to kind of help settle that anxiety and trust the timing of when things unfold?
Yeah. Well, firstly, you said something really interesting. You talked about your gut knowing, and we are all intuitive in very different ways. So, of course, there are people who hear things, there are people who smell, there are people who are body-based, there are people who work with words. And for me, it tends to be words, visuals, and feelings. But words is my strongest because it's the thing I guess I'm most aligned with. And I'm a big fan of encouraging people to write down your intuition or your epiphany, or I get people to channel for themselves at my workshops or in my online classes, because I say we can all channel for ourselves. We aren't all going to have some guide from Andromeda or the 29th dimension. And, someone might. That to me is not the point. Those are just details and characters. To me, everyone can tap into their higher self and the wisdom of their soul. All of us can. So when I encourage people to channel, I'm saying, don't worry about guides, don't worry about angels. Maybe that will happen for you. Maybe you'll connect with Jesus. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. We're going to focus on your higher self and your soul. And it's amazing. I've had hundreds of people in a room look horrified or annoyed at me when I announce that they're about to do this. And then they sit there and they're right and they're really stunned. But the reason we should write it down, number one, you can have an epiphany and you come home and you tell your spouse or a friend or, someone about it. You will misremember that epiphany. You will twist it. It will become Chinese whispered through the next coming months. So the reason we write it down, and the reason I encourage people to write it down, is to be a scientist. So when I channel for myself, there is one thing that always sits on the top of the page, and it is the date. I date every single personal channeling. And then I usually start with a question, which is, how am I doing? So before the questions I'm going there with, how am I doing? I give them permission to tell me how I'm doing and give me a surprise. But the reason I have the date there is you then can start to track through history. How true was this? How aligned was this? How useful was this? So again, study. But regarding anxiety, the fact that you bring that up, I think what intuition can do is be a teacher to us of who we are. And I've met many people who love playing with intuition, but actually are quite addicted to how anxious it makes them. And they haven't yet noticed, your intuition is teaching you something. Your default response to new information is anxiety. So the gift your intuition is actually giving you is not the information in the intuition. It's if you are willing to notice this pattern, you go, why do I always get anxious about the unknown? Why do I always get anxious about a few? That's a gift, because then you can go, okay, what was my childhood? What are the things that have happened to me in my life that have caused me to feel unsafe whenever new information about the future comes in? Or what is my chemical wiring that leans toward anxiety, and how can I best support that? So I don't know if I've answered your original question, but that's kind of where I've been led in response to what you said. And I think actually one of the great gifts about working with your intuition is it tells you a lot about who you are. And you start to notice who you are as a person. And also I've equally met some people who are very, can be very Pollyanna about their intuition and not necessarily want to look at the ramifications of what they're moving towards. So I think intuition can be a great teacher to you about who you are and how you work in the world. And I think owning that is really important. Again, it goes back to sometimes people think that the message they heard is so correct because it came from the sky. And I'm always like, did you interpret it correctly? Did you hear it correctly? Did you write it down? And now what are you, your ego, your life experience doing with that message? That to me is kind of fascinating, because that's like self-growth school all by itself. So, that's kind of how I've both experienced myself in that realm, but I've had the benefit now of being able to see, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, both in one-on-ones, in workshops, and how we as a culture deal with intuition. I think we still have this fear of the voice from the sky or the God from the sky, which has been put into us through programming. But actually, we are the sky. We just happen to be embodied in relationship to the sky. And that's the separation that I think we're beginning to lose as things like the internet have helped to spread knowledge of these kinds of senses, abilities that we all have access to. We just haven't necessarily been shown or introduced to them in much the same way that we should all have been taught about how to manage finances in school.
And emotions.
And we weren't. And emotions too.
Yes, I'm with you.
All these things.
And the intention of this podcast is to give those practical things, stories and practical insights about things that actually help us in our life.
Yeah.
And there's so much that you're starting to get into. There's sometimes we'll feel or hear an intuition, however we experience intuition. And then there's a debate between our head and our heart. And so I think it is a rebellious act to live in our heart in this world. And so much of us are overdeveloped in our mind or can overly identify with and focus on the fear-based mind. And I think you talking about being curious about that from childhood and what we get out of that unconsciously and really tuning into our heart space where there may be something that's more settled, and having the tools to kind of part the clouds from some of that is important. But there can be this push-pull. Maybe we know something to be true, but the mind's really arguing with it. How do you suggest people integrate head and heart?
It's interesting because even listening to you talk, I loved what you said, and I'm struck by, I've met many people who are perhaps too in their heart and need to go a little more into critical thinking or discernment.
Yes.
You know, because it's funny, isn't it? We're all wired slightly differently. And I think sometimes in the spiritual community that I have witnessed and been in, there can sometimes be too much of an overemphasis on, I'll just be lovely to everyone, no matter how many times they hit me around the face. And I'm like, no, we're gonna back up from that person.
Yep.
You know, so.
And I see that with business where people are like, I know how to help people facilitate change, but I don't know how to run a company or I don't know how to do sales. I'm like, well, sales can be heart-centered. Like there is that integration. So I love that we're speaking of this because it can apply to a lot of different areas of our life. Yeah.
And even you saying that, isn't that great? It just shows how, because we've all done that, had those thoughts. We all think there is some manual that we're supposed to follow, and we forget that we're here to create. Because actually, no matter how well a business has been run on the planet, that's happened so far. We're in 2025 now. We don't know what a business is going to look like in 5 years' time. And it's actually our job to create new energy templates around business, which kind of involves trusting who we are. And of course, there are certain things that have to work. But it's fascinating, isn't it, that we all have that. Oh, I don't know how to be intuitive. Can you tell me? I don't know how to run a business. And yet we're here to make it up. Like we're actually here to infuse it with new life force and who we are now, which is both a product of who we will guide ourselves to become and how we educate ourselves and how we grow. And then the other part is just what's going on around us in the planet each year and how is it changing us and influencing us.
I remember when I was a therapist, I knew nothing about business. And I would tell myself stories like, I don't know marketing, I don't know digital marketing, I don't know sales. And that really kept me in a victim and stuck in not letting myself feel my power and develop. Well, I realized, I know people and marketing is people and sales are people. So then I started questioning that I didn't know or that I wasn't good at sales. And that let me flower into, how would I do it? What feels right to develop a relationship, whether that's through an email sequence online, whether that's through a conversation with somebody. And eventually some of the digital marketing people that I was getting coached by, I said, no, I'm going to actually do it differently. And then they started looking at my numbers that were converting better, birthing this new way. But I had to start by questioning the assumption that I wasn't good at sales or I didn't know, to take my authority and my power back to say, well, no, I do know people and I can trust what feels right for me and test it. So a lot of themes that I just want to make sure people are hearing.
I love that. Yeah. So you were creating the new way and they were starting to take notice, but it's so true. We have to give ourselves permission, don't we? Because if we're so clear that we can't do something or we don't know something, and actually, as you say that, I think one of the reflections I have had along the way is similar to you. There was always the thing I always felt like I was neglecting in my business was the running of the business, especially as I've also traditionally been the front person and the person creating the work. I would be dancing between the two. And I'd always feel like I was neglecting a certain level of leadership in the business. And yet it was interesting how, as different team members have come on board and they've reflected things to me, I'll hear them say, oh, well, you definitely need to be at that meeting because you're the best marketing strategist. And I'm like, oh, things that I haven't, that you just are innate to you. And I think that's where other people are so helpful. Like, we don't see always ourselves or sides of ourselves, but like you, I know my audience, and I know who we are. And I'm always tracking, what do we need next? What's important? What's the right way to offer this to people? So I think we all know so much more intuitively and through just inner wisdom than we've ever really been allowed to understand. The shadow side of that, of course, is being a know-it-all and deciding you know everything.
Yeah.
And I think actually the people I've met who I'm most inspired by, they seem to have a beautiful synthesis between self-possession and receptivity to what's going on and what's coming in, and they can select and deselect. And I think that's why your intuition is so important in business, because actually to do business in an alive and healthy way, you have to be alive and healthy all the time to what's going on, and be as present as you can and be as conscious as you can, and be willing to make mistakes and go, oh, we drove the car the wrong way.
Ways redirect.
And I think that's also the beauty of it. And actually, if you lead a business, it can take time to encourage that in the culture. Because some of my people came in from corporate culture, and they themselves will say, oh, we had to deprogram ourselves a little bit coming in here because we don't do things that way.
Yeah. And it just feels like permission then to pave a new way, that we get to do things in a new way, and to trust that there isn't a manual and that we can just tune into what's needed and to take steps in that direction. And I know with the wave of AI and automation, things are changing quite quickly. And I think that is exciting for a lot of people, but it also brings up fear for a lot of people. How do you think technology is going to change the collective? And is there any words of wisdom you want to share with people around that conversation?
It's very interesting. So I just did this book called The Future Human with Regina Meredith, who's a wonderful interviewer from Gaia TV. And Regina has studied, researched, and interviewed everybody over like the last 25, 30 years. And so we joined forces that she could interview me while I was channeling my guides on all these topics. And it was interesting during the AI section, because she asked a lot about AI, future technology. They said a couple of really interesting things. They said AI is old, not new. It's actually ancient to us. And it's technology that we have used before. It may not have looked like it comes in the form of a computer, but AI is actually an ancient technology that has come back. They said, like anything, in the wrong hands, it can be used for ill intent, but in the right hands, it can be used in a way that can be harmonious and helpful for humanity. And that this period of time, 2025 to 2030, is the all-important 5 years around how we as a humanity interface with AI, how we accept it, and also what we say no to. And this is where I often think, well, again, supposedly a lot of the control is currently in the hands of governments around the world. So what level of dialogue and influence are we allowed to have? And I think traditionally it's been very small. And I think we're coming into an era where people are going to want to have more influence over governmental decisions, because we are being more directly affected than ever before by the difficulties or the challenges on Earth that humanity is now having to grapple with. So what I kind of perceive in all of that is, okay, AI can be a great gift, and it's something that can be used responsibly and well. But we are in the infancy stage. We're still babies when it comes to the internet and technology. We're in a very early developmental stage. And so I think there are going to be leaders who are going to be equipped. And I don't mean government leaders. I mean people who really understand the potential of AI and what it is, who are going to hopefully be able to be a humanitarian bridge between people and AI. But I do think that my sense of it is that we are in a time where, if you like, shadowy ways of using it are going to be a part of what we learn and what we see and what we witness. And hopefully a few of those examples will be what causes us to make changes. The Z's have said two things about the world that have always stuck with me. They've said some of you wish that everything was going to change overnight, and they say don't do that because it would be messy.
Yeah.
If everything crumbled overnight, there wouldn't be the infrastructure to create enough survival energy for transformation. So they say don't wish it to happen overnight, which some do. They also have said that it takes us feeling the pain of something to really be willing to make a change around it. So this is why I've always known, just from hearing their messages, no, it's not going to be a unicorns and rainbows reality. And I'm not even banking on that in my lifetime. I'm also not using that as an excuse not to do what I'm here to do. There was a really powerful moment for me personally about 7 years ago. And I really can't remember what it was that initiated it. It was like this moment where I went, a lot of darkness on the planet. I understand that now, and I've made peace with that. I'm not saying I wish it wasn't different, but it is what it is. And there was clearly some part of me that was either wanting that to not be fully true, or wanting to avoid it, or wanted to see if I could get round it. No, you can't get round it. But if you accept that it's here and you understand that's the playing field you're on, then you know where to plant different flowers and trees in the garden. And that those flowers and trees are opposite examples of the very thing that you might not like seeing in the world. And of course, we'll all have days where we're heartbroken or in grief or affected by things. But my kind of manifesto for myself ever since that day has been, yeah, there's dark on this planet. Of course there is. But I'm not here to build more of that. I'll heal my own darkness as it comes up and as I feel it and as I see it and as I get given opportunities to let it go. And I will do my best to hold space for people in a myriad of ways to be able to do the same thing and to become more of their light and their power. And once that hit me, I got out of some of the drama of, oh, I wish the world was different, or this world is so awful, or oh, this is awful. I get it. It goes back to victimhood. We all have hours where we feel like things are awful, and it's okay if you have a few hours like that, but it's not good if that is still happening through your body 4 months later, and that has become your energy template. Oh, the world is awful. That's an awful place to live. And I do have a lot of empathy for people who are in that place. I did have almost a year in my life where I felt like things were so dark and I couldn't find my way out 16 years ago. What a gift. Because it was the rebuilding of me, and it was the moment where things started to turn. But I know better at this point than to, if I'm in a hole, than to not reach out for support, or to not do something to take care of myself, or to not tell somebody, because we're all here to kind of get back up and do the thing we're here for, regardless of what we see going on in other areas of the world, or maybe right in our neighborhood or in our house, because that's how life works.
Yeah. And I know anything we resist, we give our energy to, and the power is in us. And so the part of my practice is to say, like, what is that reflecting in me, and how do I clean up my part so that I can live more open-hearted, open-minded? And I wanted to bring this question in just in closing, which is part of this. I know most people know dualistic thinking. They know right, wrong, good, bad, dark, light. And yet there's a growing awareness of what's beyond duality. And I would love just to hear your perspective on the shift from duality to multi-dimensionality.
Well, firstly, I think what hits me when you ask that is, I'm someone who had many experiences around past lives. It happens less to me now, but there was like a 10-year period in my life where it was like I had cognitive awareness of past lives all of a sudden. Not just mine, but other people's and other timelines, and seeing all of that. So the great gift of that is, that's a game changer. Because, even if you're walking around the planet now thinking, well, I'm great, I'm great, I'm really nice to people. And, you see some of your past lives, and you see some of the past lives of other people, and you're like, whoa, you were playing a very different part last time. And what the Z's have explained about that is that some of us have come back karmically to repair something that we were before. And they've said this a lot about activists. I really like this. They've said that those very frontline activists, the ones who are willing to go up against the dictators in the world, or call out what we might call extreme, I'll call a dictator an extremely violent narcissist. because they're not just narcissistic in their own life. They've decided to try and overthrow or imprison a load of other people to add to their power base, or of course, deep insecurity is really what's underneath it, but that's so buried for them, they probably will never get near it. So one of the things the Z's, my guide, said was, those who you see who are the frontline activists calling those people out, and many of you go, wow, they're really brave. No, they probably were in the same congregation as them in another life. So they're not afraid of them because they recognize it. They recognize that signature. It's always a good thing for us to look at, right? When we're irritated by someone or something, like you said, the first thing to do is go, is there a side of me that I'm seeing playing out here that I don't like, or I suppress, and I don't like that they're embodying, that's always a good frame of reference. But multidimensionality and duality, what the Z's say is we are multidimensional and we've been raised in a dualistic world, but we are coming out of that period. So as I say that, it's tricky because let's use cancel culture as an example. So cancel culture is this wave that we've seen really go across the internet in the last 5 years or so, where somebody did something bad and we cancel them. Now, sure, if you found out that someone sexually abused lots of people or was sure, there are certain things that might mean that someone has to lose their status or something for a while they go and heal and repair and hopefully transform. But it's interesting, isn't it, how the mob mentality that we have is not interested in transformation culture. It's interested in cancel culture. So we're still back in the Colosseum. We're still watching the football match, hoping one side wins and one side loses. So half go home really happy and half go home really miserable. It's that same, if you like, war mentality that's sewn in. It's kind of an annihilation mentality. So I think more people are moving beyond that and letting go of that energy template in their bodies. So I think everything you said at the very beginning of this interview, can I stay open in my heart in a conversation that previously would have been hard for me to do? As you do that, you're not only changing yourself, you're laying a foundation on the planet with the participation of the other person in the conversation, where we're all healing the old pathways that we have walked. But we have to do it actively, and we have to do it from inside our bodies and with each other. So to me, the way I see it manifesting is more people wanting to live in an elevated way. And for some, they are leaders around the body. They are the ones who are raw, or they're the ones who figured out health and they're leading us in that area. And for others, they're leading us mentally or emotionally or teaching meditation. And then the synthesis for all of us, I think, is how many areas of conscious multidimensionality can we become? The Z's once said, enlightenment is when you have achieved 8 areas of mastery in yourself. So one area of mastery might be the mastery of the mind. One area might be the mastery of the body and health. One area might be the mastery of compassion, because you can always be compassionate for people. That's never a challenge for you. So I've always remembered that. And they said, and of course, when you hit those 8, you just keep developing. But what we tend to perceive as enlightened is an energy signature that we feel from other people. Of course, we've also met many people who say they're enlightened, and then you see them behave and you're like, okay, I don't know. Okay, I'm glad you think you are, but I don't know about what just happened there.
Who is enlightened? Who is enlightened, right? So when somebody says I am enlightened, it's like,
run a mile.
Yeah, it's like, who are you identifying as that is enlightened?
And also enlightenment is just a state. So of course you can be in it briefly. You might be living in it, but I also feel like it's a personal thing. It's not really anything that we should, I'm not that interested in looking out into the world for enlightened people. I've seen so much at this stage, that it's, and I always say, actually, my favorite people are people who are in their heart. I would much rather be in an elevator with someone who's in their heart, who is an atheist and thinks that spirituality is nonsense and thinks that I'm, deluded because I'm talking to my guides, but their heart, they're not judging or shaming me for any of that, but that's just their belief system. But I can have a heartfelt conversation with them versus some of the people I've met who are the most spiritually educated, but perhaps the most heart bankrupt. And that might not be their fault. They might have had a really traumatic childhood and they just haven't got there yet. They just haven't undone and unpicked some of that. But for me, heart consciousness has always been my favorite. And I think it's the place I tend to feel safest. You know, if I'm with someone in the room and I can feel that their heart is in the room or is looking out for people or is looking out for me or is their heart is present and they've got feeling and caring about what happens to the people in the room, then I'm like, oh, good, I'm in the right room. I'm always on guard when I walk into a room and I can see the heart is not active, but the mind is. And I'm like, okay, how's this going to go? And it really depends on the person's agenda and how they're playing life.
And just the protective mechanisms, right? A lot of the time that fear, that control is just their defensive parts that are just looking for safety.
Yes. And protective and defensive mechanisms will also sometimes attack to defend themselves.
That's right.
So that's why you have to be slightly like, I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm just going to stay aware. In case at any point I need to do a ninja defense move. Yeah,
and my experience is that when my heart is open, I'm safe.
Yeah.
And I can choose to keep my heart open, even if my heart closes, like there's a bigger spiritual heart that is open. And that doesn't mean that I don't have boundaries. So I'm not a doormat, but I can speak my truth in my power with my heart open. And I think that's, again, it's full circle, some of the apprenticeship that I've been learning in leadership. And I feel like that's where we're also going collectively. That integrity piece coming up, learning how to be connected in our hearts and speak our truth and use all of it for our healing.
Heart energy is the currency of the future. That's something the Z's have said many times over the years. And I feel like I'm beginning to understand that on a human level more than I used to years ago. I'm seeing it play out. And it's so true. In order to keep your heart open, you need boundaries, so that you can not necessarily shut off from somebody, but just pull back. Because also sometimes people don't benefit from heart energy. There are some people for whom heart energy can disturb them or push them too far too soon. I've noticed that, I'll notice when I first go back to England from America, I have to do a slight culture shift because it in general, it doesn't do well to walk toward a British person too effusive. Mm-hmm. Whereas in America, that's actually quite welcome.
California specifically.
Yeah, California. So I'm like, oh, tone it down a notch because this British person is going to be very suspicious of you.
And that's loving.
And as soon as you do that the first time, within the next 4 sentences, they start, it's fascinating. I mean, we're all so different, the way we're all wired.
Attunement, yeah. I just experience you as so in your heart and such a bridge from the mind and the heart. Like there's a way that you're very grounded in yourself. And I think it's such a gift specifically for the spiritual community as well, to be able to talk about living with an open heart in a very grounded, practical world and in practical way. And I know you have this incredible book that is out. Share with us about what you're up to, your book, where people can find you. I know my audience is going to want to stay connected.
Yeah. So this book, The Future Human, it's taken from a series of recordings that happened between Regina Meredith and me when I was channeling my guide. So if you get the audible version of the book, it is the actual recordings as they were taking place in a recording studio that we worked in England. So that book is really a channeled document that is a response to all of Regina's questions about future concerns, future developments, things that are impacting us now. But where people can find me in general, leeharrisenergy.com. And I put out free videos all the time, including my energy update. I create high frequency music with Davor Bozique. So we have the whole music side of what we do. And I'm always doing courses and online events as well as live and in-person events. We have many of those coming up this year.
Beautiful. We will put all of that in the show notes below. Thank you so much for being here. It's such a treat to get to drop in with you.
Loved speaking to you. Thank you.
Me as well. Thank you so much for doing this work that changes the world, starting with yourself. It truly does make a difference. And if you're finding value in this podcast, a cost-free way to support us is by following us. It does help us grow, and we are so grateful. As a thank you gift, we will be sending you one of the most powerful tools that you can use on any area of your life to help you tap into your full potential so that you don't let fear hold you back from really stepping into your dreams. All you have to do is leave a review on Apple or Spotify, submit a screenshot of that, and upload it to alyssanobriga.com/podcast. Once you do that, we will send you this incredible gift. I have so much more magic I want to share with you, and I cannot wait to do that soon. But for now, I just want to say thank you so much for being an example of what it's like to live with an open heart and mind in the world.